The scene was the winter of 1944, one of the darkest moments of the Second World War. The Allies had liberated Paris, advanced through Belgium, and were pressing into the heart of Nazi-occupied Europe. To many in the West, it seemed the war might soon be over. But Adolf Hitler and his generals were preparing one final, desperate gamble. That gamble would lead to the largest battle fought by American forces in World War II, the Battle of the Bulge. And hidden within that operation was one of the most extraordinary infiltration attempts in modern military history. It was a scheme so audacious, so unconventional that it nearly shattered the Allied lines. German commandos trained by the infamous Otto Skorzeny were dressed in stolen American uniforms, driving captured U.S. jeeps and carrying false identification papers. Their mission was simple but devastating: slip behind Allied lines, spread confusion, cut communications, and sabotage supplies. They were to look, sound, and act like American soldiers, and for a time they succeeded. But in the end, it was not bullets or bombs that exposed them. It was something far more subtle, something only an American would know instinctively: baseball. A sport that in the 1940s was woven into the very fabric of American life. A simple question about America's pastime became the key to unmasking Hitler's infiltrators. Understand how this extraordinary deception unfolded. We must go back to the planning rooms of the German High Command in late 1944. Adolf Hitler had seen his armies push back across France after the disaster of Normandy. His generals warned him that Germany lacked the resources for another major offensive. Yet Hitler believed he could split the Allies, forcing the Western powers into a separate peace, and giving Germany a chance to focus entirely on the Soviets in the East. The chosen battlefield was the Ardennes, a rugged, forested region straddling Belgium and Luxembourg. It was the same terrain Germany had used in 1940 to smash through France, and Hitler hoped lightning might strike twice. The plan called for a massive armored thrust, over 250,000 German troops supported by tanks, artillery, and aircraft, aimed at seizing Antwerp, the crucial Allied supply port. But brute force alone would not guarantee success. Hitler wanted chaos behind the American lines: roads misdirected, bridges destroyed, fuel depots set aflame, and above all, panic. For that, he turned to one of his most daring officers, SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny. Skorzeny was already a legend within the Nazi ranks. Tall, scarred from a fencing duel, and fiercely loyal to Hitler, he had masterminded the daring rescue of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini from captivity in 1943. To the Allies, he was known as the most dangerous man in Europe. Now Hitler tasked him with an operation that would cement his reputation: infiltrate American lines with German commandos disguised as U.S. soldiers. The operation was codenamed Unternehmen Greif, Operation Greif. Skorzeny's men would wear stolen American uniforms, drive captured Allied jeeps, and sow confusion wherever they went. They were instructed to misdirect traffic, change road signs, cut telephone wires, and sabotage bridges. Some were even ordered to try and capture General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Recruiting for this mission was not easy. The Germans needed fluent English speakers, men who could imitate not just the language but the mannerisms of American soldiers. Out of thousands interviewed, only a few dozen were found capable enough to pass even briefly as GIs. Many were former sailors who had worked with Americans before the war, or men who had spent time abroad. Their training included not only English, but American slang, habits, and details of U.S. military life. Still, there were gaps, fatal gaps. The Germans could memorize the layout of American rifles, the appearance of U.S. vehicles, and the insignia of American ranks. But culture was harder to fake. In 1944, baseball was more than just a sport in the United States, it was a national identity. Players like Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams, and Stan Musial were household names. Even soldiers far from home could recall last season's World Series scores or their favorite local team. For Germans, trying to master this knowledge was nearly impossible. They could learn English, but they could not learn what it meant to grow up in small-town America with a baseball mitt in hand. The deception, however, was initially frighteningly effective. In December 1944, as the German offensive thundered through the Ardennes, Skorzeny's infiltrators slipped past checkpoints, sometimes waving confidently at real American convoys. They gave false directions to advancing units, redirected supply trucks into ambushes, and created widespread suspicion that German spies lurked everywhere. Stories circulated of enemy soldiers disguised as GIs, speaking perfect English, setting traps in the snow-covered forests. The panic grew so intense that American commanders feared Eisenhower himself might be a target. For weeks, the Supreme Commander lived under near-house arrest, surrounded by guards, his movements kept secret. At every checkpoint, soldiers were on edge. Who could be trusted? Was the jeep coming down the road really American or a German trap? To catch the imposters, military police turned to questions no outsider could easily fake. They asked about state capitals, about American slang, and most famously about baseball. A man might know how to wear a US uniform, but if he stumbled when asked who won the last World Series, his cover was blown. Some Germans reportedly failed spectacularly. One was asked about the Chicago Cubs and replied that he had never heard of them. Another was asked to identify the capital of Illinois and confidently answered, Chicago. It was, of course, Springfield. These small tests saved lives. The infiltrators caused disruption, but they could not sustain the illusion. One by one they were unmasked, often executed as spies when captured. Yet the fear they generated was real, and the confusion they sowed gave the German offensive precious time in its opening days. The opening days of the Battle of the Bulge were a nightmare for American forces. Thick fog blanketed the Ardennes, grounding Allied aircraft. German tanks surged through the forest, smashing through thinly held lines. Entire regiments were overrun. Amid the chaos, the presence of disguised German infiltrators spread a kind of paranoia that threatened to unravel American cohesion. Soldiers at checkpoints began to eye each other with suspicion. A jeep carrying supposed U.S. officers could be greeted with a smile or a rifle barrel. The military police, tasked with maintaining order, quickly realized they had to adapt or risk being fooled. They needed clever ways to test a man's identity. The baseball questions became legendary, but they were just one of many tricks. MPs would ask who the president was before Roosevelt or which team played at Ebbets Field. They might inquire about popular movie stars, names like Clark Gable or Bette Davis. Even candy bars and chewing gum brands became tests of loyalty. The logic was simple: only someone raised in America could answer instantly and naturally. For the Germans caught off guard, these questions were devastating. One soldier captured near Liege tried to prove his American identity by claiming to be from New York. When pressed for the subway line he took to Yankee Stadium, he hesitated, an instant death sentence. Another, when asked who played second base for the Yankees, stumbled and muttered the name of a German player. He, too, was finished. But the paranoia did not stop with the infiltrators themselves. Suspicion seeped into the ranks of the U.S. Army. Soldiers who had been fighting together for months suddenly found themselves interrogated by their own comrades. Officers were stopped on the roadside, their authority challenged by nervous MPs demanding they prove their identity. One general, Omar Bradley himself, was detained at a checkpoint after failing to recall the capital of Illinois. Though obviously American, he was held until his staff vouched for him. These incidents spread a sense of unease across the front. Men began to joke nervously about the tests, quizzing each other on trivia as they huddled in foxholes. Who won the World Series in '39? One might ask, half in jest, half in fear. Any hesitation, even from a genuine GI, could mean a long delay or worse. Meanwhile, Otto Skorzeny's commandos continued their dangerous work. Some redirected convoys down the wrong roads, causing crucial delays for reinforcements trying to reach the front. Others managed to blow up ammunition dumps or cut communication lines. A handful even switched road signs, leading American tanks into ambushes. One of the most audacious parts of their mission was the rumored attempt to capture Eisenhower. Though historians now debate how serious this plan was, the fear it generated was very real. For weeks, Eisenhower was effectively trapped in his headquarters in Versailles, surrounded by a small army of guards. Every officer who approached him was carefully vetted. American command could not risk the possibility that the supreme commander might be abducted or assassinated. The Germans paid dearly for their boldness. Captured infiltrators were often treated not as prisoners of war but as spies. Under the Geneva Conventions, wearing an enemy's uniform behind their lines was punishable by death. Dozens of Skorzeny's men were executed by firing squads after brief trials. Yet even in death they succeeded in sowing chaos. The executions themselves became grim reminders of the stakes, fueling rumors that spies lurked around every corner. For ordinary American soldiers, the experience was deeply unsettling. They were fighting a traditional enemy at the front, yet behind them could be men who looked like comrades but were waiting to strike. It was a war not only of bullets and shells but of trust and deception. And yet, despite the daring nature of Operation Grafe, it could not turn the tide of the Ardennes offensive. The German plan depended on speed, on breaking through the lines and reaching the Meuse River before the Allies could regroup. Every delay, every misdirection could not change the overwhelming fact: the Allies had far greater resources. Once the skis cleared and Allied aircraft returned, the German advance stalled. Fuel shortages crippled their tanks. And the infiltrators, despite their ingenuity, could not alter the course of the battle. By January 1945, the Bulge was closing. American units had regrouped, reinforced by British troops under Field Marshal Montgomery, and pushed the Germans back. Operation Grafe had failed to achieve its grand objectives. Eisenhower was never captured, Antwerp was never reached, and the infiltrators who had once seemed such a terrifying force were now either dead, captured, or in retreat. But the legend of the baseball question endured. It became part of the folklore of the Battle of the Bulge, a reminder that in war, sometimes the smallest details, a sports score, a local memory, even a candy bar could determine life or death. The collapse of Operation Grafe marked the end of one of Nazi Germany's boldest but least successful gambits. As the Ardennes offensive faltered, Hitler's hopes of splitting the Allies and forcing a negotiated peace slipped away. The infiltrators who had once caused fear and paranoia were either dead, captured, or scattered. Yet their story did not end in the frozen forests of Belgium. Otto Skorzeny, the mastermind of the mission, escaped the fate of many of his men. As the Battle of the Bulge wound down, he retreated with the remnants of his command. The Allies, however, had not forgotten him. By 1945, Skorzeny had become something of a legend, admired by his enemies for his daring and feared for his cunning. When Germany finally surrendered in May, Skorzeny was taken into Allied custody. What followed was one of the most controversial trials of the post-war era. At Dachau in 1947, Skorzeny and several of his men stood accused of war crimes. The charge: wearing enemy uniforms behind Allied lines. According to the Geneva Conventions, this act stripped infiltrators of the protections normally afforded to prisoners of war. It was the very reason so many of Skorzeny's commandos had been executed on the spot in December 1944. The prosecution argued that Skorzeny had ordered his men to disguise themselves as Americans in order to sabotage and kill, a clear violation of the laws of war. But Skorzeny's defense mounted a powerful counterargument. They insisted that his men had only worn U.S. uniforms to approach their targets, not to actually fight in them. Once the mission began, they claimed, the Germans changed back into their own uniforms before engaging in combat. The case grew even more complicated when former Allied officers were called to testify. Some admitted that the Allies themselves had occasionally used deception tactics, including the wearing of enemy uniforms during commando raids. The line between legitimate ruse and illegal perfidy was far less clear than prosecutors had hoped. In the end, Skorzeny was acquitted. The court ruled that while his methods were deceptive, they did not rise to the level of war crimes under international law. For many Americans who had lived through the paranoia of December 1944, the verdict was a bitter pill to swallow. Yet for Skorzeny, it was a triumph that cemented his reputation as both a daring soldier and a master of psychological warfare. After his release, Skorzeny became a shadowy figure of the Cold War. He moved to Spain, where he reportedly worked as a military advisor and even engaged in secret missions for various governments. Some claimed he assisted Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser in building his army. Others whispered that he had links to intelligence agencies on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The man once called the most dangerous in Europe never entirely faded from the stage. As for the legacy of Operation Grafe, it endured in unexpected ways. Militaries across the world took careful note of the dangers of infiltration and disguise. Counterintelligence units began training soldiers to ask subtle cultural questions, things no foreigner could fake with ease. In later wars, from Korea to Vietnam and beyond, the lesson of the baseball question was remembered. For American veterans of the Battle of the Bulge, the memory of those tense weeks remained vivid. Many recalled being stopped at checkpoints and forced to answer questions about their hometowns or favorite ballplayers. Some even laughed about it years later, remembering how nervous they felt trying to recall who had won a particular World Series or whether Boston was the capital of Massachusetts. But beneath the humor lay something deeper, the realization that war was not just fought with weapons but with identity and trust. The baseball question itself took on a life of its own in American folklore. It became a story told in classrooms and documentaries, a reminder of both the ingenuity of the German infiltrators and the clever resourcefulness of the American military police. It symbolized the larger struggle of the Ardennes, a battle of deception, resilience, and ultimately survival. By the spring of 1945, the German Reich was collapsing on all fronts. The infiltrators had failed to change the outcome of the war, yet their mission had left its mark. They had shown how fragile trust could be in the heat of battle and how the smallest details of culture, details as ordinary as baseball, could mean the difference between life and death. As the Allies crossed the Rhine and pushed into Germany, the memory of the infiltrators lingered. Soldiers remained wary, quick to question anyone whose accent or knowledge seemed even slightly off. And though the great deception of Operation Grafe had failed, its echoes would resound long after the snow of the Ardennes had melted. The story of Operation Grafe did more than expose the vulnerability of soldiers to deception. It highlighted a profound truth about human nature in war. Even the most disciplined armies with precise training and vast firepower can be unnerved by uncertainty. When identity becomes a weapon, trust becomes a battlefield. In the months and years following the Ardennes offensive, military historians and intelligence analysts studied Operation Grafe meticulously. They marveled at the audacity of Skorzeny's plan, but they also noted its inherent weaknesses. While German commandos could imitate appearances and language, they could not replicate lived experience. They could memorize uniforms, weapons, and protocols, but they could not replicate the instinctive knowledge of an American soldier, where the hot dog stands were in a stadium, the rules of baseball, the cadence of small-town conversation. These seemingly trivial details became crucial tools of counterintelligence. The military police at the Bulge had relied on what today would be called cultural verification. They asked questions no foreign soldier could answer naturally. Baseball became the most famous of these tests, but it was one of many, references to hometowns, local slang, or even favorite candy brands. These subtle probes were far more effective than brute force because they tapped into human memory, identity, and habit, things a uniform alone could never imitate. For American troops, the experience was transformative. Soldiers emerged from the Ardennes not only hardened by combat but sharpened in their ability to discern truth from deception. They learned that vigilance was not only about weapons and fortifications but about human instincts and the subtleties of behavior. In essence, they had become students of culture as well as war. Operation Grafe also had broader implications for future conflicts. Military strategists realized that infiltration, sabotage, and psychological warfare could disrupt armies as effectively as artillery. The lessons learned in the Ardennes influenced U.S. Army counterintelligence during the Cold War. Officers were trained to recognize anomalies, to ask subtle verification questions, and to test the authenticity of allies and enemy operatives alike. These lessons shaped the development of modern counterintelligence practices, where the mind became as important a weapon as the gun. Yet for the Germans, the operation was a stark reminder of overreach. Hitler had invested resources and trained elite soldiers in a plan that, for all its audacity, could not overcome overwhelming Allied power. Skorzeny's men may have infiltrated the lines and spread confusion, but they could not stop the advance of tanks, the arrival of reinforcements, or the return of air support. The lesson was brutal. Ingenuity without resources could create momentary panic, but it could not win a war. And so, the story of Operation Grafe became one of paradox. It was both a tale of extraordinary cunning and a cautionary lesson in hubris. It was a reminder that war is fought on multiple fronts: terrain, logistics, morale, and culture. And perhaps most unexpectedly, it was a story about baseball. A simple American pastime, a game played by millions in ballparks across the nation, had inadvertently become a tool of survival. One question: who won last year's World Series? Had unmasked trained German commandos saved lives and preserved the integrity of an army under siege? In classrooms, documentaries, and military academies, Operation Grafe is remembered not for its success but for its lessons. Soldiers learn that identity cannot be faked, that culture matters, and that even the smallest detail can be decisive in times of crisis. For historians, it is a story that blends strategy, psychology, and human intuition in a way few other episodes of the Second World War do. The Ardennes winter of 1944–1945 left scars on those who survived. Thousands of soldiers lost their lives, towns were destroyed, and entire regions were scarred by combat. Yet amidst the horror, the tale of the infiltrators serves as a reminder that war is fought not only with firepower but with wits, instincts, and the intimate knowledge of what makes people who they are. And so, the final reflection emerges. In the frozen forests of Belgium, as tanks rumbled through snow-laden roads and bullets whistled past, a seemingly innocuous question about baseball became a weapon more effective than many of the rifles and grenades in the battle. It was a testament to the resilience of human identity, the ingenuity of counterintelligence, and the enduring spirit of those who refuse to be deceived. Operation Grafe failed to change the course of the Battle of the Bulge, but it left an indelible mark on history. It is remembered not just as an episode of deception, but as a story of human cunning, cultural literacy, and the extraordinary ways in which ordinary knowledge, one small question about a game, can shape the outcomes of extraordinary events. In the end, it was not the Germans' weapons, tactics, or audacity that defined this chapter of the war. It was the Americans' ability to see through disguise, to trust instinct, and to use the familiar baseball language and memory as a shield against chaos. And that, above all, is why Operation Grafe remains one of the most fascinating episodes of World War II, a story where identity became armor, knowledge became a weapon, and a single question saved countless lives. As the snow melted from the Ardennes forests and the war drew to a close, the story of Operation Grafe took on a life beyond the battlefield. It became a legend, a cautionary tale, and a testament to the subtle interplay between strategy, culture, and human intuition. In the grand sweep of World War II, it might have seemed like a footnote, an audacious infiltration that failed to change the course of the war. Yet its lessons echo through history, teaching that warfare is never only about tanks, guns, or artillery, it is about people. The brilliance of Operation Grafe lay not in its success but in its audacity. The Germans had sought to exploit the human element of warfare, knowing that confusion and mistrust could be as lethal as bullets. They understood that chaos behind enemy lines could paralyze units, delay reinforcements, and sow panic. For weeks, their operatives achieved precisely that, until something as mundane as a baseball question unraveled their efforts. It was a reminder that the most sophisticated plans can be undone by the simplest truths. American soldiers' instinctive responses, rooted in culture, memory, and shared experience, proved more effective than any weapon. A single question about a pastime, a national obsession, became a tool of counterintelligence more decisive than years of training could have predicted. The story reminds us that identity is not just a matter of appearance or speech, it is lived experience embedded in everyday knowledge and habits. Those who tried to replicate it superficially failed. In the aftermath, historians and military theorists have dissected Operation Grafe extensively. They examine not only the daring of Skorzeny and his men, but also the ingenious methods the Allies used to protect themselves. The idea that small, cultural verifications could prevent catastrophic sabotage influenced military training programs around the world. Soldiers were taught to observe details, ask subtle questions, and trust both instinct and experience. The lessons of the Ardennes became a cornerstone of modern counterintelligence strategy. Yet beyond its practical applications, the story resonates on a human level. It is a reminder that war is never purely mechanical. Even in the midst of chaos, ordinary human knowledge, childhood memories of ball games, hometown geography, cultural touchstones can become a lifeline. It reminds us that the spirit, habits, and identity of people are more resilient than uniformed deception or enemy cunning. One might dress like a soldier, speak the language fluently, and drive the vehicles perfectly, but the essence of being an insider cannot be faked. The echoes of Operation Grafe also remind us of the psychological dimension of warfare. Fear, suspicion, and uncertainty can amplify the effects of relatively small tactical maneuvers. The infiltrators' presence caused hesitation, delays, and mistrust, demonstrating that the mind is as much a battlefield as the snow-covered roads of Belgium. For both soldiers and commanders, understanding human behavior proved vital to survival. As we reflect on this extraordinary episode today, it serves as a bridge between past and present. In modern conflicts, intelligence agencies continue to rely on cultural knowledge, local insight, and behavioral cues to identify threats. The same principles that revealed German infiltrators in 1944 inform counterterrorism, espionage prevention, and military vetting worldwide. The baseball question is emblematic. Sometimes the smallest, simplest measures have the greatest impact. Above all, Operation Grafe is a story about vigilance, ingenuity, and the enduring power of identity. It is about soldiers who, even amid the horrors of war, could rely on instinct and memory to see through deception. It is about the creative minds on both sides, the infiltrators daring enough to attempt the impossible, and the MPs clever enough to see through it. And it is about the extraordinary ways in which culture, sport, and everyday knowledge can intersect with the highest stakes of human conflict. In the end, the Ardennes winter of 1944-1945 left scars on the landscape and on those who survived. Towns were destroyed, lives were lost, and soldiers bore the trauma of one of history's most brutal battles. But within that devastation lies a remarkable story, a story of cunning, deception, human intuition, and the small truths that can shape the outcomes of even the greatest conflicts. The lesson endures. Sometimes, survival is found not in the largest gun, the fiercest tank, or the most elaborate plan, but in knowledge, instinct, and the seemingly ordinary details of who we are. For the infiltrators who wore enemy uniforms, the war was lost in the most ordinary of ways, a question about baseball. And for the American soldiers who answered correctly, that question became the line between life and death, a moment of triumph in the frozen forests of Belgium, and a story that would echo through history for generations to come. Operation Grafe failed in its mission, but it succeeded in teaching a lesson about war, human nature, and the power of identity, one that remains as relevant today as it was over 75 years ago. Beyond strategy and tactics, the true drama of Operation Grafe lies in the human stories, those moments of tension, fear, and bravery that cannot be captured in maps or numbers. Imagine a young American private, barely 19, freezing in the snow along a forest road in the Ardennes. His breath clouds in the icy air, his rifle clutched tightly. A jeep approaches. Two men wave cheerfully. They are wearing American uniforms, speaking perfect English, but something feels off. The private's heart pounds. One wrong word, one hesitation, and his life could be over. It was in moments like this that the baseball question and other subtle tests became life-saving tools. Soldiers relied not just on training but on instinct and memory. One MP recalls asking a supposed American driver, "Who hit the home run that won the 1943 World Series?" The man hesitated. Suspicion flared. Within minutes, he was unmasked as a German infiltrator. For the soldiers witnessing these small victories, it was a reminder of the stakes. Survival depended not only on bullets but on knowledge on the smallest details of their shared culture. Families back home would never know the full depth of the danger. To them, the war was fought in broad strokes: tanks, artillery, aircraft. But the soldiers in the Ardennes learned that war could also be fought in subtler, more personal ways. A question, a hesitation, a memory, these could define the line between life and death. Operation Grafe also left a psychological scar on the German infiltrators themselves. Trained for months, drilled to perfection, yet in the face of cultural knowledge they could not grasp, they failed. Reports suggest some commandos were crushed by the realization that no amount of disguise could overcome the intangible qualities of identity and instinct. Their uniforms could not protect them, their language skills could not save them. The war, for them, ended not on a battlefield, but in the silent moments of recognition by those they sought to deceive. And yet the infiltrators' impact cannot be dismissed. For days, entire American units hesitated, mistrusted each other, and rerouted supplies. Commanders delayed attacks, unsure of the true identity of those in their midst. In that sense, the Germans succeeded in creating fear and confusion, one of the most potent weapons in war. Their audacity forced the Allies to innovate, to adapt, and ultimately to triumph not just through force, but through clever verification and keen observation. Operation Grafe also resonates as a lesson in human psychology. It reveals the fragility of trust in extreme conditions and the extraordinary lengths armies must go to protect it. In many ways, it foreshadowed modern warfare where deception, cyber tactics, and misinformation play a larger role than ever before. The Ardennes infiltrators remind us that wars are not only fought with weapons but with knowledge, instinct, and the understanding of culture. Finally, the story is a tribute to ordinary soldiers, often anonymous, who relied on instinct, wit, and shared culture to survive. Their vigilance, quick thinking, and attention to detail turned the tide against a cunning enemy. And in the end, it was not the generals, the tanks, or the bombs that secured victory in these moments, but the simple human truths of memory, experience, and identity. Operation Grafe failed militarily, but it succeeded as a story of human resilience, clever thinking, and the unexpected power of cultural knowledge. And as we remember the frozen forests of Belgium, the tension of the checkpoints, and the baseball question that exposed a German spy, we see a broader truth, that even in war it is the ordinary, familiar things, the games, the memories, the habits, that can become extraordinary shields against chaos. As the Battle of the Bulge faded into history, the story of Operation Grafe became more than a tale of espionage or battlefield tactics. It became a story about human ingenuity, vigilance, and the power of identity. It is a story that reminds us that wars are fought not only with rifles and tanks, but with observation, memory, and understanding of culture. The frozen forests of Belgium had been a stage for chaos and fear. German infiltrators, dressed in American uniforms, drove through checkpoints with confidence, speaking perfect English, carrying the trappings of the U.S. Army. Yet their greatest vulnerability lay not in their weapons or vehicles, but in their inability to inhabit the American experience. Baseball, a seemingly trivial part of civilian life, became their undoing. One question asked at just the right moment exposed their deception. Lives were saved, trust was restored, and order returned to the American ranks. The human element, the instincts of soldiers, the subtle cues of behavior, the knowledge of homegrown culture, proved more powerful than uniform or training alone. Every checkpoint, every test of identity became a small triumph against the chaos of war. Soldiers who survived carried with them not just the scars of battle, but the lesson that vigilance and discernment are as critical as courage on the battlefield. Operation Grafe also shaped the future of military intelligence. Cultural literacy, subtle verification, and behavioral observation became essential tools in the arsenals of modern armies. The lesson is clear: deception can disrupt, sabotage can threaten, but human instinct and shared experience remain formidable defenses. From the Ardennes to the Cold War to intelligence operations today, the principles revealed in those frozen forests continue to guide those who must discern truth from mimicry, friend from foe. Yet beyond strategy and doctrine, the story of the baseball question endures as a human story. It is a testament to the resilience of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. It is about the young private freezing in the snow, the MP relying on instinct, the commandos undone by something they could never truly master. It is a story of courage, cleverness, and the subtle, intangible things that define who we are. In the end, Operation Grafe failed in its immediate objectives, but it succeeded in something else, teaching a lesson about human perception, the value of culture, and the power of identity in times of crisis. And in that lesson lies a timeless truth. Even amid the chaos of war, sometimes it is the small, familiar human details, the games we play, the memories we carry, the instincts we trust, that make all the difference between life and death. As we look back over the Ardennes, over the snow-covered roads, the frozen towns, and the faces of soldiers tested in the cold, we see that history is not only shaped by armies, tanks, and bombs. It is shaped by ordinary people, by questions and answers, by knowledge passed down in childhood, by the small truths that endure. Operation Grafe may have been a military failure, but it left a legacy far greater than the immediate battle. It left a story of ingenuity, resilience, and the extraordinary power of human culture. A story that reminds us that even in the darkest moments of war, identity, instinct, and shared human experience remain a soldier's most powerful weapon. And so, in the snow of the Ardennes and the memory of those who lived it, we find a lesson that resonates through the decades. A question about baseball, simple and ordinary, became a shield against chaos, a beacon of clarity in confusion, and a reminder that in war, sometimes knowledge is the greatest weapon of all. The story of Operation Grafe is more than a tale of wartime deception. It is a testament to the power of human perception, instinct, and the subtle threads that connect us to our identity. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, amidst snow and chaos, soldiers faced threats that were not always visible. The enemy could wear their uniform, mimic their language, and carry their weapons, yet the essence of being an American soldier could not be stolen. It was in small details, the knowledge of a game, a hometown, a habit, that truth revealed itself and deception faltered. A single question about baseball became a weapon more powerful than guns, more decisive than tanks, and more enduring than fear. The infiltrators, who had trained meticulously, who had rehearsed their accents and mannerisms, failed not because of a lack of skill but because they could not replicate what it meant to be part of a culture, to live the memories and shared experiences of a people. The lesson is profound. Knowledge and identity are as vital on the battlefield as courage and strength, and sometimes the most ordinary elements of life carry extraordinary power. This realization reshaped the American military's understanding of vigilance, counterintelligence, and the subtle art of observation. It demonstrated that trust, when tested against deception, must rely not only on appearances but on instinct, on lived experience, and on the shared rhythms of everyday life. The young private freezing at a checkpoint, the military policeman carefully assessing each soldier, the commandos undone by a question they could not answer, all these moments weave together a story of human resilience and ingenuity. Beyond the tactical lessons, Operation Grafe reminds us of the extraordinary human capacity to adapt, to recognize truth, and to protect one another even in the most chaotic and dangerous circumstances. It also illuminates the psychological dimensions of warfare, showing how fear and uncertainty can magnify the smallest actions into moments of immense consequence. The infiltrators created panic, but they also revealed the courage and cleverness of ordinary soldiers, the quiet heroism of those who relied on instinct and knowledge rather than brute force. The frozen roads of Belgium, the snow-covered forests, and the tense checkpoints became a theater not only of war but of intelligence, observation, and human connection. It is a story that continues to resonate, offering insights into modern warfare, the importance of cultural awareness, and the enduring value of attention to detail. It teaches that in times of crisis, seemingly trivial knowledge can determine survival, that ordinary experiences can become extraordinary shields, and that the human mind is perhaps the most powerful weapon of all. The Ardennes winter of 1944–1945 left scars on soldiers, towns, and history, but within that devastation, Operation Grafe stands as a story of audacity, failure, resilience, and insight. It reminds us that even when the stakes are highest, when chaos surrounds us and the line between friend and foe blurs, human instincts, memory, and cultural understanding can guide us through. It is a testament to the ordinary and extraordinary at once, a celebration of courage in the smallest details, and a reminder that knowledge, identity, and observation can prevail even against the most cunning adversaries. In reflecting on these events, we honor the soldiers who relied on instinct and intellect, the lessons learned in adversity, and the enduring truth that sometimes the simplest things, a question, a memory, a shared game, carry the greatest power. The story of Operation Grafe is not just history. It is a living lesson in vigilance, resilience, and the extraordinary strength found in the ordinary fabric of human experience. It teaches us that in war and in life, awareness, knowledge, and identity are shields, and that understanding who we are can be the most decisive factor in facing any challenge.